Hi, welcome back to another episode of Sketchbook Club. And this week we're going to talk about an artist who I've known for a fair amount of time. I don't know him that well personally, but I know him because I included him in a book that I wrote. And also because he was really one of the outstanding sort of young illustrators in New York, going back, about 10, 15 years, I think, is when I first heard about him. His name is James Jean, and he's a fantastic example of an artist who uses his sketchbook as both a final place to create art, as well as a sort of a lab for working on ideas that will ultimately become larger works of art, paintings and so forth. He is incredibly gifted artist in so many different ways. Incredible imagination, but also amazing drawing skill. And I'm going to show you 3 different books that he's published of his work. There's actually a number more, but his books are generally fairly hard to come by, fairly expensive. So I'm going to try and spend some time really taking you through the copies of the books that I have, just in case you're not able to secure your own. But James Jean is maybe not incredibly well known to a lot of people in the sketchbooking community, but he should be, because he is really an important artist in so many different ways, particularly in his gallery work that he has done over the last decade or so. He grew up in New Jersey. I think he was born in Taiwan, but his family immigrated to the United States when he was young. And he went to school in New York. He worked here, and then he ultimately moved to California, which is where he works now. But he's also done a fair amount of traveling, and traveling is part of his sketchbook experience. So, without further ado, let me take you through some of his work. So as I mentioned, I first encountered James when I did this book, which is called An Illustrated Life, which is the first kind of compendium that I made of the works of various sketchbook artists who I admired. Artists, illustrators, graphic designers. Maybe you know this book, but James was one of the people who I included in that book. Here's an example of one of his pieces. And there's some other examples here too of his drawings and lots of different things. There's not a huge amount of his work in this book. Some people have more pages, but there's so much detail and so much richness in his work that you can spend a lot of time just looking at what is in here. But I'm going to show you a lot more right now. So this is the first book of his that I have. Let me just zoom in because it's a little bit small. And this book is called Process Recess, and it has lots of different kinds of drawings in it. And let me just take you through some examples. Let me zoom in a bit here. So I'll start here you'll see some of his paintings, and I'll come back to some of them later on, but they're really fantastic and detailed and rich. But let's begin with the sketchbook. So this book, and this represents his sketchbooks from a fairly brief period. When is it exactly? 1999 to 2004. So this is really when he was studying art in New York and just kind of developing as a young illustrator. There's a series of drawings here that he did of his girlfriend, who's known by her initial K, but just all these drawings that he did of her sleeping, which are really, really beautiful, I think. There she is. She was having an operation on her knee, I think, so this is a bit grimmer kind of picture. But, you can see how confident he is. But what's interesting about every one of these drawings, and almost all of the drawings that he does, is he works with a ballpoint pen. And he told me about these pens that he used. I think they're from Japan, and they are very fine, very light, and he has an incredible ability to coax all sorts of different kinds of quality of color and line out of them. So a lot of times it's hard to believe that it is simply a ballpoint pen. You'll see more as we move ahead. So this is another one of his sketchbooks, and you can see it's done on this tinted paper. Now this is fairly typical of his work. Now you see amazing stuff here, right? There's these incredible little portraits here. There's so many styles, stuff from his imagination, portraits of people just drawn in public, and writing, very fine writing. And as you can see from this page, it's entirely done with basically 4 shades or 3 shades of ballpoint pen. That's and a little hint of white. This is the picture that was actually in my book as well, and it's one that he started by drawing on the subway, and then kind of his imagination went wild. So you can see again, pen and ink, well, ballpoint pen, and then layered with I think it's acrylic. I think he tells a story about how he found a box of acrylic paints that somebody had just left on a dumpster in his neighborhood. So I think that that's what he's using to just layer on top here. But again, you see how much work there is going into each one of these pages, but there's so much of it. He spends a great deal of time working in this book, and he works really fast. I love this sort of thing, where it's just sort of stains, but it's kind of, again, feels artistic, and you can see there's a person's face kind of worked into the seam of the book, and then this writing that seems almost like something out of Da Vinci. There's a lot of life studies. We'll get to that more. This is a drawing that he did. He went back to Taiwan with his mother, and he drew this disabled person who was begging outside of a temple. But what an amazing drawing. It's hard to imagine that it's really, something that he saw, but it is. Occasionally pencil. This is a pencil drawing with these coated backgrounds. He's obviously prepared this background in advance, but how beautiful. These are the paintings that he did with the acrylics, I think. Again, layering them on top of pen drawings, but sometimes drawing, as here, just drawing with a brush. Look at this drawing from observation of this fire escape in these windows. Drawing done at a jazz concert. That's an extraordinarily good drawing in my book. Well, it's not in my book, but this is beautiful too. This is obviously some sort of illustration or an attempt at an illustration. In other words, it might be a project that he gave himself. Looks like a dying man on his bed with his family waiting around him. And then this piece of white, which is really interesting. I mean, I'm not sure if that was done for an illustration. I don't think it was, though. But it would be a nice place to put text. James was, I think, a senior in art school when 9/11 happened. And these are drawings that he did from Brooklyn of the World Trade Center burning. Beautiful. And the cicada. And like for most of us, 9/11 had a profound effect on him. And ultimately, I think he moved out of New York and went to Los Angeles because of it. But look at this page. Little squares of little characters, and each one of these is a little drawing done in a square. And now you can see sometimes this work will get much less sort of figurative and more abstract from his imagination, but yet that these incredible life drawings that will pop up. He really can draw well. Drawings done waiting for a plane, flying back and forth to LA, which is what he was doing as he prepared to move to LA. Again, pen drawing. Most urban sketchers would love to be able to do a drawing like this. So confident and so quickly, you can tell that he's working quickly from what he's doing. These are some of his drawings now become paintings. So what he does is he does a drawing and then he'll import it into the computer and he'll add some tone. That's what he was doing at this stage before he started doing full-blown paintings. Incredible sense of design he has too. Another plane drawing. It's a passenger sleeping on his mom's shoulder. Just the quality of this line again is beautiful, and you can tell this is a drawing he probably spent most of the flight doing, and then this little crabbed little writing. I think that's just a perfect journal page, perfect travel journal page. It's a great combination of kind of drawings from life and then these little sculptures that he's drawn. He went to Vienna and he spent a few weeks there, and that's what some of these drawings are from, his trip to Vienna. I mean, that's spectacular because I love the way that this shadows of this bathroom are cross-hatched and given so much tone, whereas the rest of the drawing is just simple. It looks like a print, like an etching. Drawings of people in the park. And more Vienna statues. I think he spent 3 weeks in Vienna and he managed to fill up about 50 pages of this book with just the drawings that made it to them. I mean, look at that. All these different perspectives. So this one drawing, there's the writing there. He clearly started to draw this way. Then he drew this way, looking out across the rooftops. It just seems to turn. And then these layers of another kind of drawing on top of this other drawing. Give it a lot of life. Beautiful architectural study. His drawings lines are so confident that it almost looks like he's tracing, but of course he isn't. Lots of life drawings. He was taking life drawing class a lot, I guess, when he was still a student. But this is about the time that he was graduating from college and starting to become an illustrator. But at a time when, he was young. And this is one of the things I like about this book also is he has this index to the book. So this is very small. You can't see it probably in this video, but he numbers every page, and then he gives you a little sentence or two about what was going on and how he did it. And here is in the back a description of all the paints that he's using and the pencils and pens. This is that kind of pen that I was talking about. It's called the ballpoint pen SKB SB 1000. And then his brushes and the kind of sketchbook that he uses, his palette, the painting that he did on the cover of a sketchbook, and then here his list of all his favorite colors on his palette. So that's a really nice thing to have. And then there's also a kneaded eraser that's been kind of molded into a dinosaur shape. So it's a really cool book. So that's Process Recess, the first volume. And then he also did 3 volumes, and I'm going to show you the third one. This is PR3. The Hallowed Seam, it's also called. Let me zoom out a little bit so you can see the whole thing. Oop. There it is. So this is a bit later. This covers a few years later, and it's a little bit more of an art-directed book. But look at that drawing, at the detail in that scene. Again, this is probably done on a plane. I've done this kind of drawing myself, where you're kind of drawing what you can see of the person sitting in front of you. This is when he was in the emergency room in a hospital, and he's just drawing like this homeless guy who's trying to get treated, and some of the equipment, other people in the room, and his friends. So some really, really amazing drawings from life in this book. And then skip ahead, more plain stuff. Again, drawings on top of the drawing, which shows certain indifference to them. Like, these are sketchbooks, so he can do this kind of layering. And he does that sort of thing in his paintings as well, you'll see when we get to those. These are done with oil pastels. And I think they're also done with
colored ink. He paints with colored ink a lot. And so drawing and painting with colored ink, and then also layering on pastels. Beautiful. He was invited by a friend of his who was directing a movie to spend some time on the set, and he basically just hangs around and he draws a lot of equipment and people sort of watching the monitors. That's his friend who's the director sitting there. There's other people on the set. Actors. A bicycle that was being used as a prop. A train that was part of this thing. Another one of the sets. Look at how complicated that drawing is. Of sound equipment, cables, and also the cast working. And some of the actors. This little boy was an extra and drew him. Part of the costume of this guy dressed as a sheriff. A car. Susan Sarandon was one of the actresses in the film, and he talks about her and about how she would sort of hold forth and everybody would sit around listening to her stories, and so he was drawing her. That's the director of photography. So that's that book. And then here's another plain picture. As he says, he tends to do sketchbook drawing when he's not in the studio. So a lot of his drawing is about sort of sitting around, because that's when he's really doing his drawing, is sitting around waiting for planes, trains, people napping, or this kind of life drawing exercise sitting on the beach. But a lot of his time is spent in the studio. Excuse me. So he's, painting in the studio mainly. So his sketchbook, increasingly as he becomes more successful as an artist, becomes really his kind of way to kill time. I love this train. This plane looks like it was sort of smashed into the airport there, into that gangway. It's a great drawing. So more life drawing things, paintings, and then this is the kind of work that leads to his painting. So he's experimenting with layering things, experimenting with colors and with media as well. And those are beautiful life drawing. I mean, if you've ever done life drawing, you marvel at these, because I love that he spends a lot of time getting the likeness, which is fairly unusual for when people do life drawing, but it's almost like he can knock out perfect poses of the body so quickly. He can spend the time getting that likeness. Again, a picture of his easel, and then he has miscellaneous photographs that he'll put in the books as well, and another index where he explains some stuff behind the scenes of those pictures. And finally, I'm going to show you this book, which is really about his paintings more. This is a sort of more of a big coffee table book that is called Rebus, and it records about a decade, the first sort of decade that he was working as an artist. And it's a more art-directed book. It's less of a facsimile, but you'll see this kind of thing where there's a drawing that becomes a painting, and there's that sort of stuff going on. But his paintings are really beautiful, and as you can see, they are very, very rich and complex, and you can see how they grew out of those paintings, those drawings that he was doing in his sketchbook. All this layering, so much detail. He started out as basically an illustrator, and over time, he got more and more sort of big. Look at these cabbage people, that rabbit. He got more and more jobs that were high end. He did a lot of work for Prada, and the fashion designer, and he was working on stuff in their stores, and then it ultimately became, I think they turned some of it into fabric actually. And then he evolved and became really a full-time painter. That's what he is now. So he's not really a commercial illustrator at all anymore. Most of his paintings sell. I mean, his paintings will sell for 5 or 6 figures even, and some of them are very large and very beautiful. So, a lot of stuff from his imagination. And sort of related to street art in a way, but it's not. He doesn't actually do street art. He does just gallery work. There you can see how these drawings turn into these final works. So this painting covers up until I think 2010 or 11. These look almost photographic, but they're not. They're oil paintings, acrylic paintings on wood. And then he goes back at this point. This was 2010. So after exhibiting these larger and larger paintings, he did a show that was all drawn in a sketchbook again. So he's come back to kind of his roots. But look at how beautiful and controlled these drawings are now in the sketchbook. I mean, these are not normal sketchbook drawings. They're not done casually. He worked hard on them. But also you can see that they are also his imagination at work, but his drafting skills are so amazing that he can draw anything he wants to. And that's what this book is. So these are done for display. They're not for his own personal exploration anymore. These are final pieces. So that's James Jean. You can see a lot of his stuff online. You can see, just Google him, and you can look at a lot of his work. You can see a lot of examples of his sketchbook. The books that I've shown you are, as I said, quite expensive now, quite difficult to come by. I'm going to give you a couple of links to how you can buy them on Amazon, but I think like this book, Rebus, is about $80. So, you may just satisfy yourself with looking at it on Google, but I really suggest you look at his work, and you also take from him the various veins that he is mining in his sketchbooks. I mean, part of them are, as I said, ways of sort of killing time when you're sitting around, but obviously you can see that he is going very, very deep. You can see that how developed his drawing skills are, and that comes from doing life drawing that he does quite a lot. You can see also the sort of limited media that he uses, by and large, ballpoint pens, and then sometimes adding, acrylic or liquid inks on top of them. But also the way that he, uses his drawings to explore ideas, to explore his internal situation. I mean, if you spend time with these pages, you will get a strong feeling about how he was doing at any given time, what his stories were, who the people were that he was hanging out with, and how he felt about them. The layering that he does, where you get the sense of these, there are times I think of confusion in his life, and you can see that in the drawings too. There's a huge amount of work that went into them, which is always to me an indication of sometimes of loneliness. That you are that committed to your work. Sometimes it suggests that you may not have a lot else going on, but he's a successful guy. He's a happy person, I think, but also a deeply internal person and a quiet person. So I think that there's a lot of the sort of life of his mind is revealed in these pages. It's the kind of thing that you can look at first and just say, oh, those are powerful images, and that's beautiful things that he's making. But I think if you spend more time, you start to see what he's revealing about himself. Sometimes it's quite literal, like he's literally writing on the page how he's feeling or what he's doing. But also I think visually, he's showing stuff, he's revealing stuff about the depths of his mind and his personality. Spend some time with James Jean. I think if nothing else, you can put him into your pantheon of great artists you admire and would love to be able to emulate. Admittedly, most of his work seems
beyond reach, but that's often the best kind of inspiration to have, is somebody who you think, God, how do they do that? Those are the people who can often, be points on the horizon towards which you should move. And again, he's starting in a sketchbook with a pen. He's not doing something magical. He's not starting with a wand and some dragons. He's a human being like the rest of us, and I think the things that he's doing are things that we can learn from, if not match. So, anyway, thanks for spending some time with me, and some more books from my library. Look forward to sharing some more with you next time we meet.